بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى وسلم على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وتابعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري. Grace meant to forgot to mention something about. There is a show called The Family on what?
On Netflix.
On Netflix. It's based on a book. If you have the time and inclination, there are actually two books. The Family, and then there's a follow-up book to it. C Street called. If you don't have time to read the book, watch the show on Netflix, because it helps you understand the historical moment we're living in. It's about a Jesus movement at the higher echelons of power that got it in its mind to bring Jesus to the world through the powers of the White House. It's a huge problem in terms of separation of church and state, and it really makes you revisit the whole idea of a secular United States in the current atmosphere. But it also helps you understand the rise of the Islamophobic movement, the entire hegemony of this very broad, bizarre idea of Jesus, or ruling the world in the name of Jesus, while at the same time completely ignoring the disempowered and things like racism and classism. And so anyway, if you get a chance, it's important for your education as a citizen in the world today. That's pretty much what you want to say, right?
It's diabolical. It explains so much of what's happening in the world. To me, I found it really insightful in terms of like what we're really up against when we're talking about how people aggregate power. And it's a little bit depressing too, because you recognize that the people in power have all the power, all the money, and that in order to fight this, we have to be really smart and very. I mean, it's a completely different game, but it's so diabolical. It's just like it's evil genius. So, but it's really important to watch.
So, والضحى والليل إذا سجى. Last Halaqa, I spent a lot of time introducing the framework, in part to connect people to the historical moment in which Surah Ad-Duha was revealed in, and as a quick review of things we already talked about, but just to connect the prior discourse to this one. So as we said, that unlike the practice of sajda, the practice of using words as an oath in pre-Islamic Arabia, the Quranic oath, where God swears by certain things before getting to the Jawab al-Qasam, or the main point, what is sworn by is very important, and it's never haphazard. And if you reflect on what the sort of the introduction in Surah like Ad-Duha, it yields an enormous amount of insight. So as we said, the Ad-Duha is an hour, a moment in time at the rise of the morning. And وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى, and the night when it settles. Saja means for something to settle and to overcome and Um, best word is settle. I don't. Yeah. So if for and it also refers to sukoon, or the settlement and anchoring of something. So even in Arabic, if you say sajat al-ayn, it means that the eyes have become, that your eyes, or whatever eyes you're referring to, have, is tranquil and calm. Not necessarily that your eyelids have closed, but that these are calm and tranquil eyes. So as we said, that the significance of Ad-Duha wal-Layl, that as many have pointed out, that Ad-Duha, they're swearing by the rise of the sun and the settling of the night, is this constant movement between up and down, between happiness and the opposite of happiness, even between enlightenment and the opposite of enlightenment. And it's as if God is alerting, speaking to the Prophet at this specific moment, as we said, and it's as if God is telling the Prophet, reflect on the fact. Now, as we said last time, that this is, Ad-Duha wal-Layl was revealed after a period of time in which the Prophet ﷺ is not receiving revelation, and according to various narratives, that he becomes anxious and unhappy because he received revelation, and then he had a dry period, a period where Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, is not coming to him, and there's no revelation. And as we said last time, that there's even this report when Gabriel does come to the Prophet after this dry spell, the Prophet tells Gabriel, I missed you, and Gabriel responds says, and I missed you too, but what can I do? That I only follow orders. So in other words, Allah didn't send me to you with anything. So the oath here is significant because it's as if Allah is alerting the Prophet that, get accustomed to the fact that we alternate between, and we also talked about the same theme in Inna ma'al usri yusra, that we alternate between happiness and sadness, we alternate between relief and tension. The nature of the life that I've created and given you, Muhammad, and given humanity as a whole, the nature of it is that it is in a constant state of motion. Now, a number of scholars pointed out that Ad-Duha is but an hour in the day, while Al-Layl al-Saji, or the night that has settled, is far more than an hour, because the darkness of the night far exceeds in time the hour of Ad-Duha, or the rise of the sun. And they pointed out that I'm trying to see if I wrote down the language. Yeah. So that the Duha, the Arabic goes that يعني النور الذي في قلب العارفين كهيئة النهار والليل الساجي يعني سواد قلوب الكافرين كهيئة الليل. So what they're saying is that the day, the expression of Duha is representative of the state of enlightenment that you enjoy if you're Arif. Arif is someone who has grown close to Allah and has knowledge of the divine. And while al-layl, the night, the darkness of the night is representative of those who have steered away from Allah and that have drifted away from Allah. Some have even said that Ad-Duha is representative of Kamal al-Aql wal-Layl Hal al-Maut, that Duha is representative of the mind when it is in a healthy state. Kamal al-Aql doesn't necessarily mean that a perfected intellect, but it means an intellect in its most reasonable state. So a mature intellect that doesn't necessarily is not immune from error, but a mature intellect is often represented by the expression al-dahi, or that the enlightened, while the night and its darkness represents a state of death. Now, you could have an intellect that is living, meaning it is it's conscious, but effectively it's dead because you don't use it. And some even went further, and as I always say, that the Islamic tradition, when it comes to the Quran, it's always layers of meaning. None of these meanings exclude the other, but you can understand them at various levels of depth. So you can simply take Ad-Duha wal-Layl Iza Saja as alerting you to how God alternates the morning and the night. That's sort of like the first level. Or you could say a further meaning, the constant motion between happiness, enlightenment, relief, and the opposite of it. You can even take it a step further and say God is alerting you to the nature of Ad-Duha representing life itself, and Al-Layl Iza Saja representing death. Many, though, took it beyond that and said Ad-Duha is representative of your the ideal state in which you try to seek, or to seek after, and that is an enlightened, rational intellect, while Al-Layl Iza Saja is the opposite of that. Just to give you, for those who know Arabic, just give you a sense of how deep the layers of meaning could become. I'm going to read it in Arabic first and then comment on it. So here's an example of one commentary that goes well beyond the first layers of meaning. So it says وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى أي وحق الإنجلاء التام المنعكس على عالم العماء اللاهوتي المخشي لمطلق الأضواء والأنوار المتفاوتة المرئية في نشأة الغيب والشهادة المقتبسة من الأسماء والصفات المستتبعة للإضافات المتكثرة في عالم التفضيل. Now, of course, some Arabic speakers might hear this and not get anything from it. And if we would give it its due, it would take us a very long time. But what he is basically saying is that Ad-Duha wal-Layl Iza Saja represent the contrast between states of enlightenment that require an affirmative investment of energy. That the status quo is non-enlightenment. So you're born in a state similar to Al-Layl Saji, that you are similar to a blank state. You only know enlightenment in the most intuitive and instinctive sense. But in order for you to emerge from عالم الغيب والشهادة to العالم اللاهوتي, that in order for you to evolve from this basic state of instincts and basing desires on your most basic and raw instincts to an understanding of the reason for your being and elevating your consciousness so it becomes like the rise of the sun at that moment of Ad-Duha requires an affirmative investment of energy. That's basically what he's saying in this short quote. When you recite Ad-Duha wal-Layli iza saja, don't recite it as mere words, but visualize, and we touched upon this the last Halaqa, but I want to underscore it, but visualize that the state of nature, the vast majority of space, is occupied by what we today call antimatter or dark matter. In other words, an affirmative, very low energy state of being. Well, antimatter and dark matter, they're matter, but they exercise very low gravitational pull on the effect their atmosphere in such low energies that they basically don't count. But that's a vast majority of the nature that we live in. The vast majority of space is occupied by nothing. Creation is an affirmative act, like God's light. And it is a blessing, like life itself. The vast majority is occupied by a void. And for Allah to give you a state of consciousness and the possibility, the ability to raise that state of consciousness to a state of duha, to a state of enlightenment, is a real gift. Now, the vast majority of us, as we'll get to when Allah tells the Prophet ﷺ, فَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ, the vast majority of us are not conscious of that gift. I mean, we don't give it its due. We don't value it the way, because if we did, if we truly valued that gift, we would never waste a life, neither our own life nor the life of others. That is why, as so many in these traditions that you read, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that if the life of a single human being is worth in Allah's more than the Kaaba itself, or God would rather have the Kaaba be torn down than see the life of a Muslim be extinguished. You get the gist of the point, that it is a very valuable gift, and what you do with it is of great consequence. And all of that in these simple words, Ad-Duha wal-Layli iza saja. It's as if these simple words sparked an enormous amount of discourse that reflects on the way that God alerts us to the nature that we exist in, and the way that this nature alternates. And as if telling the Prophet ﷺ, set your expectations accordingly. Yes, those moments of revelation when you are in the presence of the divine in a complete and total way are moments of great elevation to your soul, but you cannot expect that will be your constant state, exactly like Surah Al-Inshirah, which we've talked about before. Okay, so وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. And as we said, that when God tells the Prophet ﷺ, God has not forsaken you, Quranic discourse, when it addresses the Prophet ﷺ, there are parts of the Quran that address the Prophet with no implication beyond the Prophet. So, for instance, when Allah talks to to Muslims at the time of the Prophet and says, وَلَا تَرْفَعُوا أَصْوَاتَكُمْ عِنْدَ النَّبِيِّ, that don't raise your voices in the presence of the Prophet. This is directed to the context of the Prophet. And although some said, well, you can derive from it certain rules of politeness, that if you are in the presence of someone who's valuable, mind your voices, that it's not polite to speak very loudly. No one is of an equal status to the Prophet ﷺ. So it is speech addressed to the Prophet that doesn't have an import beyond the Prophet. However, much of the Quran is addressed to the Prophet with a moral lesson that is directed at Muslims at large, like Surah Ad-Duha. Surah Ad-Duha is one of those surah, like the surah we also talked about, that is considered by many the companion Surah Ad-Duha, Surah Al-Inshirah, Inna Sharahna Laka Sadrak, which we've talked about, that although addressed to the Prophet, Muslims can derive from it a great deal. So when Allah speaks to the Prophet saying that I want to make sure though. Yeah, that, and as we said last Halaqa, that there are some reports, one that I've rejected, that Khadija, the Prophet's wife, says, did your God forsake you? And as we talked about, that I don't think that report is authentic. While there's another report that Abu Lahab's wife went to the Prophet knowing that he has not received a revelation for a period of time, and said, Arani qad qalaka shaytanak, that your devil has abandoned you. Of course, she's being sarcastic. In either case, Allah talks to the Prophet and say, your anxiety and your unhappiness is not justified, because in fact God didn't abandon you. Now, what relevance is this to Muslims at large? This is answered by another revelation, وَمَا يَقْنَطُ مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ إِلَّا قَوْمُ الظَّالِمِينَ, that only those who are unjust or ignorant despair in God's mercy. If you have a relationship with Allah, conditional, if you have a relationship with Allah, if you invest in a relationship with Allah, then rest assured that Allah doesn't abandon those who do not abandon God. So, similarly, although, of course, the Prophet's relationship with God is at a very different level, but derivative from it is you cannot despair in God's mercy. No amount of sin that you commit is beyond God's forgiveness. And the moment that your shaitan, that your devil, starts whispering to you that maybe you're forsaken, maybe you're abandoned, maybe God doesn't care what you do or say, or that is from the shaitan. Allah doesn't abandon those who don't abandon the path to Allah. And so much of what is written around that particular ayah, مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى, focuses on this precise point. Okay. Now, all of this is somewhat review from the last Halaqa. Okay. Now, last Halaqa, did we get وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى? Did we get to that? Or?
We get
We did?
Yeah.
So, as we said that وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ الْأُولَى, the first is better for you than the last. Now, of course, Muslim commentators paused at this and said, what is the first and what is the last? And as we said, as I'm sure that we said, because I don't remember saying it, but I'm sure that if we dealt with it, that I would have said it, that is Allah speaking about, listen, you are Allah's prophet, and what will come in the life that will follow, because remember, this is now in Mecca, and this is when Khadija is still alive, and the Prophet ﷺ is going to confront enormous amount of tribulations. He doesn't know this as a human being. He doesn't know that Khadija will die, and her death will have an enormous impact on him. It's so much so that it's called the year of sadness. That he's going to be persecuted to the point that he will have to leave Mecca, and that in Medina things will follow, like the defeat in Uhud, like the siege in Ghazwat al-Khandaq, the battle of the trench, which if you read the details of that siege, it's traumatic by in every sense of the word. So when Allah, it's as if when Allah promises the Prophet ﷺ that what will come next is going to be better than the situation that you're in, it's Allah promising the Prophet ﷺ victory. Now, as many have pointed out, that this is among the narratives in the Quran that were used in the field of kalam, especially, or theologians, to argue that, it can't be that Muhammad is the author of the Quran, because he wouldn't know what will come next, and he wouldn't be able to promise himself a coming victory, which in fact unfolds. Okay. Now, as I'm sure I said, that others pointed out that no, the meaning goes deeper than that. It is not just talking about what will unfold in the Prophet's life, ﷺ, but it is making a point that can be generalized to all human beings, all people addressed by the Quran, that if you truly understand the nature of life on this earth, you will also understand, as the Quran points out repeatedly elsewhere, that the true life, your true destiny, is the hereafter and not the here now. That the here now is overwhelming to your senses, because as a human being, you exist in a material condition. That material condition appears to you very real, very concrete, very material, only as the text I read from goes into at great length, that if you actually make the affirmative investment in raising your consciousness, then you will understand that that material condition is as if la'bun wa lahu, that as if it's playfulness and nonsense. It's a constructed reality that doesn't have an objective ultimate truth. If you want the objective ultimate truth, what comes after death, not before death. And of course the challenge, and that is the challenge between, as I said repeatedly, that our most fundamental and basic disagreement with non-believers are those who basically believe there's nothing beyond death, and those who believe that the story not just continues, but the material part of the story unfolds after death. And it is also a way that you can test your own iman. If your iman, Allah puts it in elsewhere, when Allah alerts us and tells us that there are some people, when they do dua, all they do dua about are things that have to do with this life. Allah, make me earn more money. Allah, make me healthy. Allah, make me happy. But they forget to do dua about the hereafter. Or when they do dua about the hereafter, there's no passion in it. And this is quite common, by the way. So if you are one of those people, don't feel discouraged. It's very common that you feel a great amount of passion if someone you love is sick, or if God forbid you have cancer, and you then pray with intensity, Allah, please cure my son, my daughter, please make this work out, please cure me. But then when you do dua about the hereafter, you sense, if you have self-reflection and if you scrutinize yourself, the sense of intensity and anxiety goes down. That, as many of the old teachers point out, that is a way to inspect the state of your own iman. If you find that your intensity dims when it comes to your dua about the hereafter, then you need work. Then you need a greater investment. Then your iman is not where it should be. Fundamentally, our iman, when we say ashhadu anna la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, when you say I bear witness, you're bearing witness to something that you have not seen, but something that you place your belief in. And so our iman is a belief in the unseen and unexperienced. Okay. I'm trying to figure out anything. Okay. There's some points of grammar that you can skip. Okay. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. We have to finish Ad-Duha today, so. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. Did we get to that or no? No. So this is verse 5. Amanda, you have a Quran?
I don't have it with you.
Okay.
I have it.
Okay, read verse 5.
Your Lord is sure to give you so much that you will be well pleased.
So the words are straightforward enough. God will give you so that you will what? How does he translate it?
Will give you so much that you will be well pleased.
Okay. Reasonable. God will give you fatarda. Ar-rida is to accept with satisfaction. Ar-rida an shay is not just accepting something, but being in a satisfied state, pleased state with it. So here the first level of meaning, as we always methodologically our approach with, you could take it to mean that God again is promising the Prophet ﷺ that not only have you not been abandoned, but the way that your life will unfold, you will be victorious. And many theologians point out in this context again that, look, unbelievers, non-believers, Muhammad could not be the author of the Quran because he could not promise himself rida. He could not promise himself that he will be satisfied. If he would have been killed in Mecca, then that, the impact of a verse like this would have resulted in everyone leaving Islam, and that would have been the end of the religion. To commit yourself to a promise of victory would not be very smart if you're the author of the text. So that's at the first note. Theologians then ask the question, however, what does rida mean here? When God tells the Prophet ﷺ that you will be satisfied, we know that in many narratives, the Prophet comments particularly on this verse. He says, رِضَائِي أَنْ لَا يَدْخُلُ النَّارِ مُوَحِّدٌ, that I cannot ever be happy or pleased as long as a muwahhid is someone that says La ilaha illallah, someone that follows, someone who's a Muslim, for brevity's sake, let's say, someone who's a mu'min, who's a believer, that I cannot be happy if a believer goes to hell. So my true satisfaction is to see the salvation of all my followers or all believers. Some even say, well, it's not just the followers of the Prophet at the time of the Prophet, but even those who followed the Prophet Ibrahim, for instance. That's a muwahhid, that's a mu'min, that's a believer. Or those who, believers in the one and only God. So for Ja'far al-Sadiq, the famous founder of the Ja'fari school of law and from Ahl al-Bayt, from the family of the Prophet ﷺ, says that فَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى, that the principle of shafa'ah, and shafa'ah, just so for those who don't know, shafa'ah is when the Prophet ﷺ intercedes in the final day to ask God to forgive those who followed, to forgive believers. Now, why is the principle of shafa'ah such a big deal? In Islamic theology, maybe not so much in our modern age, but in Islamic theology, the idea of intercession was always very controversial. Can anyone intercede on anyone else's behalf? Now, we know, for instance, that in Christianity, the ultimate, taking intercession to its ultimate extreme, is the death of is the story of Jesus being sacrificed so that people are forgiven their sins. That's sort of a taking intercession to its ultimate extreme. The sacrificing the divine so that the mundane can be forgiven. Mu'tazili theologians in particular said Islam cannot have intercession because accountability is individual and personal. No one can intercede on anyone else's behalf before God. And rejected the intercession of a Sufi imam on behalf of anyone, and also rejected the intercession of prophets on behalf of their people, as they rejected the intercession of Jesus on behalf of his followers. So all intercessions were rejected. Sufis, of course, embrace the idea of intercession, not just the intercession of the Prophet ﷺ on behalf of Muslims, but also the intercession of the aqtab, or their teachers, on behalf of their followers. Various theological schools took a middle road on the question of intercession. And believe that the intercession of the Prophet ﷺ is a necessity, in part because of verses like this one. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. God will give you until you're pleased. And then the argument usually goes, well, do you think the Prophet ﷺ repeatedly says in various reports that I cannot be happy in the hereafter as long as I see any Muslim in hell? And they argue that if Allah promised the Prophet ﷺ that he will be satisfied, that indirectly supports the idea that the Prophet ﷺ will in fact intercede, so that ultimately either Muslims are completely forgiven or that they're partially forgiven. You can believe what I do believe personally. I do believe in the idea of the Prophet ﷺ's intercession, but I don't believe that it is an automatic thing. I do believe that it is something to be earned. So often in my dua, I will ask Allah to allow the Prophet ﷺ to intercede on my behalf in the hereafter. In other words, I want the Prophet's intercession because I know how close the Prophet ﷺ is to Allah, and I want anyone to plead on my behalf. Maybe that's the lawyer part of me. Anyone that will make a plea on my behalf before the ultimate judge. And who better to make that plea for me than the Prophet? But, and again, I've encountered all types of people that, some who believe no, this is a promise. The Prophet will intercede on behalf of all Muslims, regardless of whether they ask for it or did dua for it or not. That's not the school that I follow. I affirmatively ask for something that I beg for in the hereafter. Some of the reports here, for instance, just so you know, a hadith, for instance, that reported that the Prophet ﷺ says, it's reported that the Prophet said, "Ummati, ummati, فإن سروري أن أراهم فائزين بثوابهم." The Prophet said, my ummah, my true happiness is to see them all in good shape in the hereafter. There are many reports like that. We can talk about the authenticity of these reports forever, but it's, for the sake of time, we're not going to do that. Okay, have I forgotten anything? No. Okay. ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى. This is verse 6.
Did he not find you an orphan and shelter you?
Okay, the basic meaning is clear. We know that the Prophet ﷺ lost his father, then lost his mother, then his grandfather who took care of him and died. Some reports say a year, some say 2 years after, and then his uncle Abu Talib. Two things to point out about in this context, which comes from the Islamic tradition, which is worth pointing out. There are a lot of beautiful reports when commenting about أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى, didn't he find you an orphan and sheltered you, about the relationship of the Prophet's uncle in particular to the Prophet ﷺ when the Prophet was a young man. And among those reports, the ones that have always left an impact on me is Abu Talib says, and this is long before the Prophet marries Khadija and long before the Prophet is a prophet. So this is when he's just a young man in Mecca. That Abu Talib reports that the Prophet would always, before he would start eating, he would always say Bismillah, in the name of Allah. And when he would finish eating, he would say Alhamdulillah, thank Allah. And Abu Talib comments that we in Mecca never did that. This was not our practice or part of our customs. And I was always intrigued about that. And there is a report that Abu Talib then asks Muhammad, why do you do that? And he says, I feel a deep-seated sense of gratitude in me, that whatever I am consuming, I am not entitled to. Other reports that I also have always touched me is Abu Talib's comments about how shy the Prophet ﷺ was. Abu Talib, there's so many narratives about how he, among all his children, he would find a great amount of happiness in the companionship of Muhammad. And that when he would often want him to sleep next to him. And one of these reports is that, some of these reports is that when they're getting ready for bed, they're taking off their clothes, they're changing off, basically taking off the clothes, the day clothes, and putting on whatever sleeping garments he slept in. And all the kids, Abu Talib's children, would take off their clothes in front of each other and in front of Abu Talib. But the Prophet, and again, this is long before he's a prophet, would always go to a secluded place and change his clothes away from people's eyes. And Abu Talib comments about this and says, I've never met a human being as shy as Muhammad. He would not expose his upper part. No, we're not even talking about genitals, we're talking about legs and chest. He would never change his clothes in front of his brothers, meaning the Abu Talib's children, or in front of me. And that when we sleep, he would refuse to sleep in the buff, in our language today. He wouldn't sleep balboos. Balboos is the word I invented for naked. It's not in Arabic, it's in no language, I think. Huh?
Bila libas.
That's probably where it came from. Subconscious.
You did not invent it. It's
It is?
The word
Bamboos
used-
is, yeah, in Egypt.
Oh, okay.
Balboos is-
So alhamdulillah, because like some Arabs say, where did you get the balboos?
No, because you would say bamboos.
Balboos?
Yeah, that's what I grew up with. It was bamboos.
Okay, anyway, so it's always caught. It's interesting that they're commenting on about the experience of Abu Talib, the Prophet's uncle, with this yatim, and these sort of like little snippets about his mannerisms, especially that we don't have a lot about the Prophet ﷺ before he is 40 years old. So whenever and you have to search the tradition, often in variety of places, to get little glimpses about the life of the Prophet ﷺ before he is a prophet. The other thing is that the way that Muslim theologians co-opted أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى, hasn't God found you an orphan, so and sheltered you. The way it was turned into a normative value for Muslims generally. So for instance, I'll read it in Arabic first, and then comment on it. فيقول تعالى الطريق إلى ذلك أن تفعل في حق عبيدي ما فعلته في حقك كنت يتيما فآويتك فافعل في حق الأيتام ذلك وكنت ضالا فهديتك فافعل في حق عبيدي ذلك وكنت عائلا فأغنيتك فافعل في حق عبيدي ذلك. And what he's basically saying is that if Allah is reminding the Prophet ﷺ of the blessing, a gift, that you were an orphan and I sheltered you, then a priori, if you want to satisfy Allah, you do what Allah did to the Prophet, what you do the same towards other human beings. So it becomes a normative value to shelter orphans. And of course, and again, this connects to my last khutbah. You can read the Islamic tradition with an ethical normative orientation. And if you do so, you will find you can arm ethics into the Islamic tradition. But if you approach the Islamic tradition without an ethical being, you miss out. Muslim theologians and jurists didn't have to read أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى, hasn't God found you an orphan and sheltered you? Didn't have to read it in a normative fashion. Didn't have to read it as basically creating a normative value that you do the same towards human beings. In fact, in Islamic law, that gives, in part, verses like this give birth to the entire discourse about the rights of God and the rights of human beings and the relationship between the rights of God and the rights of human beings. That whatever good God extended to the Prophet Muhammad or other prophets or Quraysh. So for instance, when Allah says, وإلاف قريش إلافهم رحلة الشتاء والصيف ليعبدوا رب هذا البيت الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآواهم الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف, who fed them and secured them from fear or removed their fear. They turned that into a normative value, that if Allah has done this for Quraysh, then it becomes a normative value for all human beings to do the same towards all other human beings. That making people secure and removing fear becomes a normative value within the field of the rights of God and the rights of people. Okay, what time is it?
6:40.
Okay, just to monitor myself. Okay, moving on. وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. The only thing, okay, this is what, number 7?
Find you lost and guide you.
Yeah,
7.
very simple, very short. Nothing is fully. The question that Muslim theologians dealt with about found you lost and guided you. Elsewhere in the Quran, for instance, what Allah addressing the Prophet says, وَإِن كُنْتَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ لَمِنَ الْغَافِلِينَ, before the revelation you were lost and misguided. The Mu'tazila in particular, and others theologians, some Ash'aris, said, how can it be, it is not rationally possible for the Prophet ﷺ to have been totally misguided before the revelation. Because we know that he would in fact go to Ghar Hira and he would contemplate the Maker and worship the Maker before he became a prophet. So how could it be that Allah would tell the Prophet that before the revelation you were misguided? He was never a kafir, he was never a mushrik, and in fact, in this context, you will often read in the traditions about how the Prophet ﷺ never joined in the activities of the polytheistic activities of Quraysh, although as a member of a noble family, he was entitled to participate in a great deal of them. So he never partook in the very wide practice of going to prostitutes. Nearly everyone, if you read pre-Islamic poetry, prostitution was so widespread. And by the way, this was not just an Arab thing or Meccan thing. It anchored in the practices of Babylonian and Ashurian religious practices that remained in Arabia long after Babylon collapsed was the practice of holy prostitutes. Prostitutes were a part of the way you served the deities was to commit some of your daughters, you donated some of your daughters to becoming holy prostitutes. They would serve the temple. And people would come pay money to the temple, and as a way of receiving the blessings of the gods, you would have sex with the prostitutes. Now, we don't know if the practice of holy prostitutes continued in Mecca. Some scholars say yes, some scholars say no, but we know that all the Meccan nobility engaged, frequented prostitutes as well as drinking alcohol. The Prophet did neither. Long before, he's never drank alcohol and never went to a prostitute. There in fact some narratives that there was one time that the Prophet, not drinking alcohol and not prostitution, but wanted to attend, some say a wedding, some say a festival in which there was dancing and drinking and so on, and he just wanted to go watch. And he says that when I went and I sat down, and as soon as I sat down, I fell asleep. And I woke up and the thing was over. And basically, whether he fell asleep as a blessing from Allah so that he doesn't see all the haram stuff, or whether he fell asleep because his state of being, as the Sufis say, that his state of being was so pure that as soon as he sat down, he became entirely bored and conked out because it was entirely unimpressive and unremarkable to him. Either, doesn't matter. The hadith for just for you, for the sake of the record, وَمَا هَمَمْتُ بِشَيْءٍ مِّمَّا كَانَ عَلَيْهِ أَهْلُ الجَّاهِلِيَّةِ إِلَّا, and the tradition goes on. That, so, he was not a dal in the sense of partaking in the activities that the polyists engaged in. I might have mentioned earlier or before or somewhere that he also refused to sacrifice for the deities long before he became a prophet. And that had an effect on his career, because if you didn't sacrifice for the deities, people didn't trust you to lead their caravans. in trade to either the Yemens or to Damascus. And Khadija, notably, trusted the Prophet, although knowing that he will not sacrifice the deities. The reason she was a special woman, part of the reason she was a special woman, is that she didn't buy into the stuff. She didn't buy into the idea of sacrificing the deities, and was willing to trust her caravan to the Prophet, although he refused to attain the protection of the deities through sacrifices. So now, unless one of you plans on becoming a theologian, you're probably not awfully interested in the question of, well, so in what precise sense was he guided by the revelation? Huh?
I'm actually interested in that. But, go on.
Okay, well, we might then elaborate on it in the Q&A, but I'll give you just the snippets. There is nothing in the Quran that I find nothing in the Quran that I can cover just in 30 seconds. Dal, the critical issue here is that word dal. The most interesting, I'll take some of the most interesting in this entire discourse. In Arabic, dal could mean something that is misguided, but could also mean something that is unique. So ash-shajara ad-dalla, modern Arabs wouldn't necessarily know this, but ash-shajara ad-dalla in Old Arabic meant a tree that grows up, that rises in a place where there are no trees. So if you see a plain with a single tree, that is ash-shajara ad-dalla. Not that it is lost, but it is unique. And so some of the most interesting thing that comes out in this context are those commentators who say Allah is telling the Prophet, I see how unique and lonely you are. You go to Ghar Hira and you look at the sky and you supplicate to Allah, and you want to come into the fold of Allah. You want to be secured as if, in the imagery, في حضن الله, in the bosom of Allah. So Allah called you unto Allah's self, and therefore, as if Allah wrapped Allah's arms around you. And in that sense, وَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. It's very, it's some of the most interesting things that comes out of commenting on found you, what often is translated the most basic level, found you misguided, found you lost and misguided you. Say, no, if you want a better translation, it would be found you alone or lonely, or unique doesn't really, and took you into the divine fold. Some say that also, although this is sort of a more scholarly than that, the Israelites and the followers of Christ believed that the coming Messiah, the next prophet, the awaited Messiah, will be an Israelite, and that Fahada, they tie that into the entirely unexpected development at the time of that the coming Messiah would be of the progeny of Ismail and not the progeny of Ishaq, would be an Arab, not an Israelite. How do you get there is a long story that I'm going to skip. If you're interested, ask me in the Q&A. Okay, good enough? وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. This is 8.
Find you in need and satisfy your need.
Okay. Now, وَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. What is the need that is being satisfied here? Of course, at the most basic level, I would say, well, as an orphan, you were extremely vulnerable, and Allah protected you. I noticed that the evangelists and Islamophobes was their dedicated channels in my research period so toxic that even, I mean, it's very, alhamdulillah that I studied Syriac at Princeton, and alhamdulillah that I studied Hebrew, and alhamdulillah that I've spent a lifetime studying all the material that when I encountered the Islamophobic and evangelistic channels, I could easily recognize the stuff they were lying about. But I wondered if the person who has not, how the heck can they maintain the course? Because I've heard several evangelists come to this وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى and found you in need and, oh, how did he say it again?
Find you in need and satisfied.
Yeah. That, look, this is proof that Muhammad became rich from being a prophet. And that the Quran itself, now of course if someone was just thinking rationally, would say, well, wait a minute, how could the prophet promise himself he's going to become rich and it become true, and somehow this would impeach him as a prophet? But their point is that they want to prove that Muhammad waged battles in order to make booty, to make money from the battles. And that the khums, the 1/5 that Muhammad earned, made him a very wealthy man. And that was his incentive as a prophet. And I was, of course, doing this research a while ago, but I was amazed that they kept pointing to وَوَجْدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى as part of their arsenal to say, look, even the Quran admits that the prophet was rich. Of course, that's not, that would work for people who don't know Arabic.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that's not what that.
Yeah, because that's not, aghna doesn't mean that you become rich. So it could be that you are an orphan and Allah protected you, but it also could be, or beyond that, it's possible that it is a promise, a futuristic promise that you will not want, you will not be in a state of need. However, that's a stretch of the language, and that's sort of twisting the arms of the language. And I'll tell you a report in this context in 1 second. Some Muslim commentators, and this is where the evangelists get their stuff from, or the Islamophobes get their stuff from. So, for instance, there is a report attributed to, actually I can't remember if it's Abu Bakr or Omar. So anyway, the report commenting on وَوَجْدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى that Allah is making a prediction that you were wanting as an orphan, فَأَغْنَاكَ بِمَالِ خَدِيجَةَ ثُمَّ أَغْنَاكَ بِمَالِ أَبُو بَكْرٍ, that Allah then protected you with the money of Khadija, and after Khadija died, protected you with Abu Bakr's money. And of course, the Islamophobes jump on this tradition and say, see, it's all about money. If I didn't find the kids, your kids, or your kids in the future, if you don't have kids yet, affected by this crap, it wouldn't bother me so much. It does create deep cuts in the Muslim psyche because we don't have anyone responding to it. No one, no voice is out there saying anything in response. Anyway, the vast majority, though, point to the most obvious meaning, that you will taste or you will become in a state of contentment. We know that the Prophet ﷺ, in the life that follows, that he lived in dire poverty. He dies with his shield, where he had borrowed money from a merchant, a Jewish merchant, as they're quoted. That often there was no cooking that would take place in his home for days. That in fact his wives complain at one point because of the state of need that they're in, etc., etc. But the state of contentment is an inner state. And so most point out that the poverty is not material poverty, but is the spiritual poverty. That whether you feel that you're poor or not, or you're rich or not, is an inner state. You could have $10 million and still feel poor. It's not the money that's going to make you feel rich or poor. It's your inner self. Okay, there's a Mu'tazili's discourse that I'm going to skip here. I'll tell you one of the reports in the context of Halaqa and Aghna that is always narrated, that again these little snippets about the life of the Prophet ﷺ, especially at the time of Khadija, because again we don't know a lot about about his time when Khadija was alive, especially before the Hijrah. The Meccan hadith compared to the Medinian hadith is far less in amount. So anyway, one of the narratives that is often reported on in the context of Wajlaka ila al-Aghna, the Khadija sees the Prophet Muhammad is sitting and he looks pensive and burdened, and she says, what's wrong? And he responds, as zaman zamanu qaht, that things that this is at the time of the boycott, and at the time of the boycott the Meccans refused to trade or sell or buy anything. So there is a serious cash flow problem in our language. There's no money. And he doesn't want to tell Khadija that he goes out to the market, tries to sell and tries to do what is his profession as a merchant. But there's no trade. No one will trade with him. And he's hiding it from Khadija initially, because he doesn't want to tell her the bad news. And she says, what's wrong? So why are you saying things are so bad? So he tells her, okay, they're not selling or buying, and there's no money. I'm not bringing in money. So she says, but my money, I have money. Take from my money. So he says to her, فَأَسْتَحِي إِن بَذَلْتُ مَا لَكِ اسْتَحَيْتُ مِنْكَ وَإِن لَمْ أَبْذُلْ أَخَافُ اللَّهِ. But if I spend your money, what is he spending it on? He's spending it on taking care of all the followers, especially that many of those who followed him in Mecca were from the slave class and the class of the disempowered, and they were affected by the Meccan boycott by starvation. They were starving to death. So he's saying, if I take from your money to spend your money on these people, astahi mink, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to spend your money. But if I don't and let these people starve, I fear Allah. And then as the story continues, she insists that by God, if you don't take from my money and spend it on who needs it, that I will complain to God about you, and then he accepts the money. It's one of these endearing reports that has always touched me, that sort of gives me a little glimpse into their relationship. You know, you can imagine he's sitting pensive, trying to hide the bad news, no cash flow, no business. He has a lot of followers that are starving. You know, she digs it out of him, and then insists on him taking the money. Again, in my little toxic encounters on social media, you can tell that, you know, it was a very unpleasant encounter because it stuck with me. I find that the Islamophobes and the evangelists focus on this issue of they hate the fact that the Prophet Muhammad was married to Khadija, and say that the reason he didn't take a second wife when he was married to Khadija is because he was afraid that Khadija would kick him out in the street, and if she would have done that, you know, basically he had no one other than Khadija, and that he spent all of Khadija's money. So everything is oriented in a very sinister, negative, toxic fashion. And again, I'm not worried, maybe naively, I'm not worried about you guys, but I'm worried about your and my children, because they would not necessarily have the type of background knowledge to be able to counter this in any way or have a second opinion about this. Anyway, a final point about qana'ah, being satisfied. Again, an example of the Arabic, أغناك بالقناعة فصرت بحال يستوي عندك الحجر والذهب. That the type of satisfaction that Allah will give you is, and your inner soul will become in a state where gold and stone will be equal in your eyes. So in other words, you will not care very much about the value of money. Okay. فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر. Let's do 9, 10, and leave 11. So let's do 9 and 10.
So do not be harsh with the orphan, and do not chide the one who asks for help.
Okay. These now become important normative commands. And remember, this is among the first beginning Quranic revelation. If Allah, even you, prophet of God, if Allah does good towards you, even you, prophet of God, Allah expects that good to unfold in the way you treat other people. So a priori, it applies to the average Muslim. Do not oppress the orphan, and I'll tell you a number of reports that come in this context. And do not, what was it again? Do not
be harsh with the orphan, and do not chide the one who asks for help.
Okay, I would translate do not oppress the orphan, or chide, I guess would work. And do not chide or be harsh with someone who asks for help. In this context, some of the most powerful reports that you can possibly read about what the Prophet ﷺ commenting on فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ the Prophet ﷺ says about Muslims and orphans. So some of, and I'll just give you little snippets because there are too many for us to cover in and some of them I've written the language. Yeah. Okay. So some of them, some of the most, the Prophet ﷺ is on Anas, a report through Anas that says, إذا بكى اليتيم وقعت دموعي في كف الرحمن, that if an orphan cries, the tears of the orphan fall in the hands. Kaf al-Rahman is hands going like this, in the hands of God. فمن أبكى لهذا اليتيم الذي وريت والده في التراب فله النار ومن أسكته فله الجنة. That whoever causes an orphan to cry is doomed to hellfire, and whoever removes the tears of an orphan is promised the heavens. Some other reports in this context, a man went to the Prophet ﷺ and said, and shaka al-rajul qaswat al-qalb, he said, I have a harsh heart. When I do dua, I never cry. Tears never come down. So the Prophet ﷺ tells him, إن أردت أن يلين قلبك فامسح رأس اليتيم وأطعم المسكين, that if you want your heart to become tender, to become a humanistic heart in our language, then take care of the orphan and feed the needy. Your state, your spiritual state, is affected by your actions, and particularly for the state of orphans in Muslim countries, by the way, is abysmal. If you've ever gone to an orphanage in Egypt, it's one of the most horrendous experiences, some of the worst places. It blows my mind because of all the traditions, the Islamic tradition, because the Prophet ﷺ was an orphan, and because Allah tells the Prophet, in the same way that you are an orphan, I took care of you, then take care of orphans. No tradition emphasized the importance, the moral importance of orphans being taken care of as the Islamic religion tradition, the Islamic religious tradition. The fact that orphans in the Muslim world are in the state they're in, so you go to so many Muslim countries and you see tons of street children, tells you the relationship of Muslims to their normative ethical tradition in today's world. If you want, some people say, write me and say, I find myself struggling with my faith, I do my salah and I have a hard time concentrating in prayer, I don't have a real understanding of Allah. My answer, most often than not, is go find orphans to take care of, or go find needy people to give money to. You want your heart to start becoming tender? Give. not theorize, not pray more hard, not concentrate in your prayer, that is not going to open the door to Allah's blessings. In the same way that Allah, the material relationship with the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet is the Prophet, is that I've taken care of you, O Prophet, so you take care of the others. You are not better than the Prophet. Allah's not going to draw closer to you. لَنْ يَتَقَرَّبَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكَ حَتَّى تَتَقَرَّبَ إِلَى النَّاسِ. Allah will not draw closer to you unless you draw closer to other human beings by taking care of them, not by being there, not entertaining them or playing games with them. I am sure in today's world you can find orphans and needy to take care of. That is the answer. If you can't concentrate on salah, if you find that you don't relate to your prayer, then you don't give enough. There is another tradition in which the Prophet ﷺ says, in the final day, Allah will bring orphans and say to each orphan, "Man abkak, wa man ahzanak." Who وَمَنْ ظَلَمَكَ, who made you cry, who made you sad, and who committed an injustice against you. And orphans will bear witness against everyone that made them cry, or made them sad, or committed an injustice, and those Allah will not forgive their sins. So they don't get a break. Now, there are so many traditions. So, another tradition in this context that is also I found very interesting, that Moses, again, it's reported from the Prophet ﷺ that the Prophet Moses wanted to draw closer to Allah. Remember, Moses is the prophet that tells Allah at one point, I want to see you. You know the story, right? Yeah. So that before this event, that Moses wanted to grow closer to Allah. So Allah inspired to Moses that if you want to grow closer to me, then show great tenderness and compassion towards the sheep that you're herding. Moses, like the Prophet, was a sheep herder. So that there, as the story goes, there was a sheep, a young, what's a baby sheep called? Lamb. There was a lamb that got lost from the herd, and Moses went to look for it, found it, carried it back to the herd, and upon doing so, Allah says, Allah inspires through the angel Gabriel, that do you see this action of carrying the lamb back to the herd? It was seen with such favor by Allah that you have just grown closer to Allah. And as the hadith goes, I'll just say the Arabic. نال موسى عليه السلام النبوة بالإحسان إلى شاة فكيف بالإحسان إلى اليتيم. So then the Prophet ﷺ comments on this story by saying, if the Prophet Moses achieved ihsan through kindness to Isha, to a lamb, then how about kindness towards an orphan? Again, some of the traditions that emerge from the context of commentaries on أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. Okay, وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ, and don't rebuke that who asks. The most important set of narratives I can tell you about is reportedly, and this is a subject of some theological debate, but reportedly Allah rebukes the Prophet ﷺ on 3 occasions. Do you know what the 3 occasions are?
The blind.
Do you want me to go through them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the 3 occasions are the following. That the first is what you mentioned, that there was a blind man that the Prophet ﷺ is talking to, is arguing with some of the aristocrats of Quraysh. They're asking him questions, he's answering. A blind man comes up to the Prophet. He's a man from a tribalist man, from a tribe that is not important, and pulls at the garb of the Prophet and says, I have a question. And the Prophet ﷺ puts him off because he wants to continue talking to the aristocrats of Quraysh. And there is a Quranic revelation where Allah says, no, you should have paid attention to the blind poor man, which is a norm and an ethic very different than the folks that you see in the documentary The Family about the Jesus folks, who say you take care of you bring Jesus to the rich and powerful, those that God has chosen to rule. By the way, part of what worries me about the theology of people like Bin Bayya and Hamza Yusuf is the idea that those who are in power have been chosen by Allah to be in power. So even MBS, MBC, and Trump, well, Allah chose them to be in power, so you have to obey them, and you have to, give them counsel in private, but don't embarrass them, don't disobey them, so on. Part of what bothers me is precisely the ethics of that goes very contrary to narratives in the Islamic tradition that say that the powerless are the ones that matter, not the powerful. Okay, the second occasion is when the aristocrats of Quraysh told the Prophet ﷺ, listen, we don't like the fact that when we talk to you, around you, the people who come attend our meetings are poor and former slaves, freed slaves, and people from the lowest rungs of society. We're willing to meet with you, but we want a separate meeting. You make a day for us, a day for the noblemen, and a day for the others. And initially, according to the reports, the Prophet agrees, but then Allah comes and says, no, you cannot have a separate day. And again, very different than those scholars that agree to be on special advisory councils to rulers and so on. It's a very different ethic. And my own experience in serving on the Commission of Religious Freedom confirmed that lesson. If you live with elites, you become an elitist, inevitably. The third occasion is actually the one that is least known and the most interesting for this context. The report goes that Abu Bakr, the companion, goes to the home of the Prophet and finds that there's nothing to eat. So he goes out to the market, buys some dates, and goes to the home of the Prophet and leaves the sack of dates right there. A few minutes pass, and someone and who comes to the door? Some reports say one poor person, I don't remember his name. Other reports say a few of them. Anyway, they come and they're basically asking the Prophet. They're saying, "We're poor. We do you have anything to eat?" So the Prophet looks around, finds nothing but the sack of dates. So he takes a sack of dates that Abu Bakr had just bought and gives it to them. Says, here. Abu Bakr says, that's a bummer. I just brought the dates so the Prophet's home can have something to eat, and he just gave it to these people and it's night time, and I can't go, everything is closed right now. So what does he do? He follows the people who just took the sack of dates and say, hey, come here. I'll give you money for the dates that the Prophet just gave you. So he basically buys from them what he had just bought from the market. They say, okay, but we sell it to you over the market value. He says, fine. Here's money, takes back the dates, goes back to the home of the Prophet, puts the sack of dates there. These guys are, naughty. They see that Abu Bakr took the sack of dates and went back to the Prophet. So they go back to the home of the Prophet, knock at the door again, and say, oh, Prophet of God, we have nothing to eat. So he gives them the sack of dates again. The same sack of dates. He says, here you go. Abu Bakr is watching this again. He says, oh my God, these losers. I'm inventing the losers. He didn't say that. I can't believe this. But he goes after them and it says, okay, I'll pay you again. He says, but for a higher price this time. He says, fine, here. He gives them even more money. Takes the sack of dates back to the Prophet's home. For a third time, these same guys go back to the home of the Prophet, knock at the door, and say, we have nothing to eat. So this time, the Prophet knows what's going on. He's not stupid. He knows that they're playing this game. So he says to them, to them or to him, depending on the report, أَسَائِلْ أَنْتَ أَمْ بَائِعَ. What this means is that the Prophet is saying, I know what you guys are doing. Are you really needy? Or are you really merchants? Basically, trying to make money. So he's basically embarrassing them. He's putting them on the spot. And according to this, that وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ, that there is a revelation on that occasion telling the Prophet, no, you should have said that. That even if, because you know they're needy, and they're doing this because they really do need the money, even if they're obtaining it through tricky ways, you should not have embarrassed them. So the most that you could have done is said, okay, sorry, not tonight, guys. I can't give you the dates this time. But you should have put them on the spot and embarrassed them. These are the 3 times. Now, there are a lot in the Islamic tradition in the context أَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ, beyond the reports about the dynamics of the Prophet or the dealings of the Prophet in particular, that emphasize that it is a sin, a very serious sin, to send off a needy person in a way that demeans or embarrasses or makes the needy person feel their need. And and again, there's a lot that you can, under that general subtitle of a needy person feel their need, you find a great deal written in the Islamic tradition about, and a lot of, by the way, very beautiful poetry about what a pious person ought to do so that they do not let a needy person feel their need. Okay. So, what time is it?
7:31.
Okay. I promise 5 more minutes. Yeah. So, فَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. How is that translated? Anyone was,
And as for the blessing of thy Lord, proclaim.
Okay. To put it in the most direct and time-conscious fashion, to proclaim Allah's gifts, to be grateful towards Allah's gifts, التحديث بنعمة الله, to acknowledge Allah's gifts is to do for others what Allah has done for you. So it is not simply saying Alhamdulillah, and it is not simply the ibadat, although a priori these are necessary. But taking care of the orphan and taking care of the needy and doing for others what Allah has done for you is it tahdith bi ni'matillah. In this context, أخر, and I'll read the Arabic and then I'll come to it. أخر الله حق نفسه عن حق اليتيم والعائل. So what they're saying, that note is a very noteworthy observation, that Allah only mentions the rights of Allah, at-tahdith bi ni'matillah, that be grateful to Allah, only after mentioning the rights of human beings first. What you take from that is you cannot discharge the rights of Allah unless you discharge the rights of human beings. So this orientation, the Christianizing of Islam that you find among some Muslims that want to turn Islam into, just worship in your home, and it's not a social program, it's not has nothing to do with justice. It's a different religion. It's a different religion. They're inventing a new religion. Allah put the rights of human beings, mentioned the rights of human beings before Allah mentioned the rights of God. Because you cannot serve the rights of God unless you discharge the rights of human beings. If Allah made you wealthy, then how do you thank Allah for that wealth? You take care of the needy. Prayer and fasting is not enough. It's not going to do it. It's not going to cut it. If Allah gave you knowledge, how do you thank Allah for the knowledge? You teach. Thanking Allah and saying, thank you Allah for making me so knowledgeable, and that's it. That's not going to cut it either. Whatever Allah gives you, the way you acknowledge your debt to Allah. And I remember the very first Usuli Halaqa, when I said that the way gratitude is expressed in Islam is through a social program, basically through engagement with others. That ethics comes from verses like this, or surahs like this. Imam al-Hussein has a very nice saying in commenting on Surah Ad-Duha. He says, it is when you do good, you speaking about the good that you do can either be motivated by a selfish motive, i.e. your ego, your vanity. If so, then conceal the good that you do. But if you protect your ego from vanity, فَحَدِّثِ النَّاسِ بِالْخَيْرِ الَّذِي أَحْدَثْتَ لِيَقْتَدُوا بِكَ. So speak of the good that you do so that you will be an example unto others. Okay, let me see if I'm forgetting anything. I mentioned the story of the dog last halaqa. The wahi doesn't come to the revelation, doesn't come to the prophet. It's not an authentic report. That because there were dogs playing at the house. You guys remember this? Dogs playing at the house, and then the angels come in and say, well, we couldn't come because there were dogs in your home. And I forgot to mention another tradition, just for the sake of completion, that there was a woman that used to visit the Prophet's home and help take care of help clean at times. She was a volunteer. She wasn't a lam takun ajira. She wasn't a paid servant. She was a woman that would volunteer to come help clean the house's home every once in a while. And according to that tradition, she comes in and she discovers a dead dog, a dead puppy under the Prophet's bed. And apparently, according to that tradition, is a puppy sneaks into the Prophet's home, goes under the bed and dies. And that the angels don't come because I won't put any weight on these traditions, but the reason I mention them is that if you encounter a Wahhabi type, they will no doubt cite to you these traditions to tell you as proof that dogs are that dogs shouldn't be at your home. SubhanAllah, after the halaqa yesterday, last time, I found a Wahhabi who was citing the dead puppy report, which is remarkable. I'll tell you the evidence, just even without looking at the isnad, and the isnad has all types of problems, but even without looking at the isnad, do you want to know the obvious proof that it's not an authentic report? Because the report continues on and says that servant took the dead puppy and threw it over a wall. In what type of Islam do you get rid of the corpse of a dead animal by throwing it over a wall? Do you really need to look at the isnad to know that it's a fabricated report? I mean, it really and then, of course, when Islamophobes find Wahhabis citing a tradition like that, you find it on their channels, and then our kids encounter it and say, see, this is what Muslims... It just... Okay, I actually didn't forget anything, which is remarkable for me. Thank you, and alhamdulillah. And we are done with Surah Ad-Duha, alhamdulillah.
So the pizza is here, so what we can do is Maghrib also. So we can pray Maghrib, and then grab pizza, and then reconvene for a Q&A. So then we do first part of the Q&A is for things related to Ad-Duha, and then after that we can, if we have time, we can open it up to just generalized questions.
You can ask about whatever you want to ask.
Whatever you want. Okay.